Welcome back, water people. What follows here is the second part of our conversation with master shaper Tom Wegener. If you haven't listened to the first part yet, do that, so the references in this episode have context. Here, Tom dives further into the nitty-gritty of board construction, on nearly getting the call to be in the Endless Summer 2 and experimenting with ancient techniques in the shaping bay. When we were chatting about surf filmmakers, there was someone's name that you omitted, and that was Bruce Brown. Yeah. And I was wondering if that was intentional or unintentional. I know you have a story with the Endless Summer too.
Oh, well, I love Bruce Brown. And, I mean, that was it. I was a tiny kid. I remember watching it on TV, and it would just come up on TV all the time in Los Angeles. And I just loved that movie. I just couldn't believe it. My eyes would just pop out of my head. And I'm going to be a surfer. And Endless Summer 2 came. I was told later by Chris Aarons that there was 3 people that he said, these are the 3 surfers that you should shoot for. One is Joel Tudor, one is Wingnut, and one is Tom Wegener. But Joel's a bit young, because the movie's going to take so long to shoot that he may actually seriously change in looks. So they said, okay, I'll go with this Wingnut. So Bruce Brown called him Wingnut. And Wegener told me that he got the call and he goes, okay, Bruce, hold on. Well, where are you? Okay, what's your address? Yeah. Okay, will you be there in 7 hours? Yeah, okay, Bruce, don't call anybody. I'm on my way. And he hung up the phone. And Wegener jumped in the car and just blasted down to Seattle. So I didn't get the call, which is fine because I was knee deep in 10 Toes Over at that time.
Wow.
But so that was, surfing, that longboard era, that was a great time. And it was a great time in for that genre of surfing because it was new, it was exciting, it was being molded. Nobody knew where it was going to end up. And some people wanted it to become like shortboarding, where you have the heats and they tour with the shortboards. Others said, no, this is an artistic thing. We should go back and stay to the 70s and pre and say that longboarding is an art form and it shouldn't be a contest sport because how could you possibly judge this? So it was a very, very special time. And you had the modern longboarders versus the traditional longboarders, and they were at war with each other. It was classic. It was so funny. And so what I did is with the surf movies is tried to capture the 60s and kind of put a new twist on it and have this new surfing culture. And we were very conscious of the culture that we wanted to portray in 10 Toes Over, in Siestas, in Toes Across America, in The Barebutt Adventure, and all those movies that we were making at the time.
Right name.
We wanted to show that surfing is a culture, it's a lifestyle, it's just the relationships, it's the traveling, it's all of it mixed up. And we almost never put in surf contest footage but on the other hand, the surf contests at that time were so fun because you would go to the contest for the day. Everybody would go to the contest for the weekend. I mean, one of the classics when at the Oceanside Longboard contest. Back then, regulations on doing things at the beaches were a little bit looser, and they'd get the digger out and they'd dig a huge pit and they'd fill it full of rocks and wood, and the Hawaiians, all these moke Hawaiians would show up. And they would burn. The Hawaiians would be standing around it, watching this huge fire burn on the beach, and the rocks were on top of it. And then Donald would organize a pig to come. They'd take a whole pig and they'd march it over, just like in the ancient times, drop it in there with sweet potatoes and everything. And they'd wrap it in banana leaves and they'd cover it up. And these big Hawaiian guys would stand there for days, standing, making sure that nobody stepped on it. But they were the full Tahui, guys. Yeah. They're all tatted up, massive, standing there. And it was just sort of this icon. It was this thing from the distant past. You had this incredible respect for food and knowledge and at that time it just seemed normal. But I don't think, 40 years later, I don't think it'd be normal anymore for, somebody to come up on, burly heads and take a digger.
But for me, I hear the inseparable link between riding waves and eating good food.
Yeah, isn't it right?
Ancient and inseparable.
I know you love history. I know you and your son, Finley, have always been into stories, historical stories and whatnot. And then thinking about, just the mass of untold surfing stories around the world. And when I say that, I think of, the belly boarding women and general folk in England, at Land's End and all those places. And then you mentioned India. And I was just thinking, oh, God, let's go down this rabbit hole for a little while. And maybe it's not that interesting to other people, but I was wondering what else is in that archive in your mind. So you pointed out a couple there, but are there any other stories when you think about, forgotten corners of the surfing history or culture around the world that come to mind?
Well, in Tasmania, in Hobart, in 1890, they were making properly steamed belly boards with the lifted noses. So 1890, they're already making them there, and there's a picture of a board with a steamed up nose. So going back to, it looks like they started in South Africa. So in South Africa, they would have been, fully belly boarding early on with boards with the lifted noses. And then I was with Mike Henson, one time about the Endless Summer. And I kind of way back when, 1989 or something. I was in this surf shop called the Longboard Grotto, and I was buying some artwork for a restaurant that was in Palm Springs. And so I bought the Endless Summer poster, and Mike Henson walks in. And I get him to sign it. Yeah, Redondo Don's Mike Henson. And so the guy looked at me and said, try to charge me another $100. I said, no, I'd already paid for it. But I asked Mike straight up. I said, look, I know you in Africa. What did you see? What were they surfing on? And he goes, I've sworn to secrecy. I can't tell you.
No.
So they were fully surfing. You just watch it. They were fully surfing back then. And then, of course, the Surfer magazine guy, editor, went there to the island, and they're fully surfing. So surfing was already throughout Africa. There's no doubt about it. And China, you read the book?
Yes.
Nick's book.
Yeah, Nick. Oh my God, like that. So of course it was absolutely everywhere. When I was in Taiwan one time, a long time ago, in 2003 or something like that, I looked up and there was an Olo outside of a surf shop. And I looked at that and I said, it's just too big to be a surfboard, but that's a surfboard. It was a surfboard. It would have been an Olo of that. Of course, the Aboriginals, Australians were, of course, surfing. And then sure enough, I was looking through these. I loved, looking at the ancient. And they said, here's these kids paddling out in a dugout canoe, and the kid catches a wave from the dugout canoe, and then the next shot is a little kid on a bellyboard goes screaming by. So they were surfing. Of course, the Papua New Guineans, I was talking, through the whole thing up there when I was making the wood surfboards up there when Nathan's movie. There's a helicopter and plane pilots that came there, and I was asking him, do you ever see surfers? And go, oh yeah, there's surfers everywhere. Wherever you go on this island, there's surfers. They're in the water's full of them all the time. That they're surfing, but there's no roads, there's no communication. They've always been surfing. So in India, they were surfing, and one of the early articles. When the first surfers went down there, they paddled out, and all of a sudden kids came out with boards, and they were surfing in India and Sri Lanka.
Yeah, the word catamaran is actually traces back to a Tamil word, catamaran, and so that word is Indian in root. Of course, they were experienced water people. They were fishing. They were making their livelihoods from the ocean. It's only efficient to know how to work with waves, right?
Exactly. And then when the first sailors would go to India, they weren't harbors. They'd have to anchor out way off sea. And I forget the name of the city, but the only way in was out through surfers. Mm-hmm. And so the surfers would paddle out, you'd hop on the boat, and the guy said, the only reason to go there, or the best experience you'll ever have in India, is riding from the boat to the shore. On the surfboards.
Was that a Catholic priest? I know I read about a priest who was doing that trip and ended up shipwrecking, and he was part of suppressing surf culture in South India, at least. Maybe it wasn't him. I can't remember his name.
I don't that doesn't ring a bell, but that's amazing. That's another, all these stories.
Isn't the word surf come from India? Isn't that word is coming from India?
I'm not sure.
Anyway, what else is in the Tommy Wegener vault of historical knowledge when it comes to surfing? Because I just feel like it's, I doubt there's anyone who, in this country anyway, that's got the depth that you have. Anything else come to mind?
Oh, it was funny when the whole Alea thing was happening. It was so exciting because it corresponded with the internet and with YouTube. So it was a YouTube revolution where you'd be putting this stuff up and people were just diving on it because there wasn't all that much surfing up anyway. One of the guys said, "Oh, in not Fiji,
Vanuatu?
no,
Samoa.
not. Oh, in Samoa, there's a book. When the first, I got this book. One of the first missionaries, the first missionary actually to go there to Tonga. Actually, it was to Tonga. Was talking about surfing and how that the chiefs and so forth every day they would go surfing. But they said, "Oh, you can use a surfboard, but that's for the kids because real men don't need a surfboard. They body surf." And so there's you can see the wave. And they say that carved in the rocks there's at very low tide. There's a carving, so it would have been done when the sea level was lower, of guys carrying surfboards. But the surfboards are shaped like triangles. So they rode triangle boards, which actually ride pretty good.
Yeah, you see the triangular pipos in Hawaii that crew have ridden. This film, Val Valentine's, all that footage is of triangular pipos.
Exactly.
Yeah, wild.
When the Alea thing started, one of my friends, a Christian, came to my house and he brought one of the belly boards, one of the little belly boards that was super flexible with a lifted nose. I just went, where did you get that? Because it's funny really being into surf culture. I had never seen one in real life, in my life. And Woodsy, Noel Woods from Caloundra, like he was taking photos of them and sending me back saying, there's a couple of boards like this in New Zealand. Wow. And so, and even Captain Cook, when he went to New Zealand, one of the artifacts he brought back was a surfboard. He put that on the boat because he was so impressed with that. So surfing has been everywhere. It's just so ingrained in what we do.
And that makes me think about what you were saying earlier about, indigenous wisdom saying that nature is always trying to tell you what to do, revealing, if you listen, tell you how to work with, the systems that are there. Yeah. And of course, that's what surfing is. Like those waves are telling us that that's what you do with them.
The only way in.
Yeah, only way in.
Yeah, you got to get out and you have to come back in if you're going to catch fish. Yeah. And go out and get to boats and travel and all that.
Tommy, when we were chatting before, I really wanted to ask you about making boards. You were saying there are 4 different basic types of surfboard structures. And I just would love for you to talk through that because I thought that was really interesting. You were talking about timber and extruded polystyrene and I don't know, there were 4 of them. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah. Growing up, we all had Clark foam. You guys had, Bennett foam, polyurethane boards, and they work good. And then the first time I jumped on a EPS board, expanded polystyrene board, I went, my God, that feels so different. I can't believe how different that feels. And then I had balsa wood boards, and I got on the balsa wood boards, and they had such a different feeling altogether. And I just chose balsa over everything else. And even Tom Curran told me, he goes, I would always ride balsa if I could. There's so much opportunity in learning about surfing and surfboards just through the materials that you use. And I think that the Alea, David and I've found out that this simple thing of riding that flat piece of wood is really, really amazing. And of course, the ancients were doing that. So that's a solid piece of wood. But as soon as you start making that thicker and heavier, it gets much harder to ride. So only certain waves are good for that solid piece of wood.
If we release this conversation in its natural format, this is almost like, and this is for you, Nathan Oldfield, this is almost like one of those Lord of the Rings movies. I think the final one where there's like 3 fake endings. They do the strings and there's a really slow dissolve into the black. But then we keep coming back.
I know.
Which is great. Really... No. I want to keep going because I think this is really good because, your understanding of surfboard equipment is really blossoming right now, Lauren, because of riding different shapes and taking on all kinds of new challenges. And so it's obvious that you have a desire to, learn more about what does different materials even mean to a surfing experience, doesn't it all just work the same?
From a master who knows
exactly.
Who knows what the difference is in the making.
Yeah, and can articulate it. So you're talking, so we've gone into the PU and then you rode EPS and then now balsa and you're talking up the balsa experience.
Yeah. So actually, I'll start over. Okay. Just because I was coughing then. I was making surfboards out of polyurethane foam in 1978 and actually reshaping old boards that had been thrown off the cliff and so forth and making those. And, you think, okay, that's it. That's the be all and end all. And then I hopped on some balsa wood surfboards. And back then, there were lots of balsa wood boards around still. And they were cheap. And they surfed so good. I just couldn't believe it. I just was just shattered by how good the balsa wood felt. And so then I had to, got rid of those as I go to university and so forth. And then I hopped on EPS. I said, oh my gosh, that has a similar buoyancy. It's not the same, but it's a similar thing. So it seemed, what I felt as though different boards would need a different shape. If you had a polystyrene, polyurethane, and balsa wood board, in order to surf the same, you'd actually have 3 different shapes. Or if you had the same shape in the 3 different boards, the board would ride radically differently. So, it's kind of what is it that you want out of a board? Do you want that really light bounce out of polystyrene? Or, in my opinion, kind of the polyurethane actually is a bit of a dead. It actually doesn't bounce it doesn't flex as good as poly. Do you agree, David?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite board from Donald Takayama, I broke it in half. I tried to put it together and it melted because it was polystyrene. So I went, oh shit, I actually really like this stuff. So it always opened up that, if you want to refine the surfing experience, then you do that. And then you get to the hollow wood surfboards, which have a whole different feel again. And my gosh, they float and they're, very different. They may be heavy on land, but they're very, very light in the water. So when I used to make those boards, I'd always carry the board down to the water, let the guy paddle out. He'd get you a couple of waves on it. Oh my gosh, the thing's great. And then, okay, you want to buy one, you get the order, and then you let him carry it to shore. Actually, the greatest story of all is when in ancient times, a Hawaiian, in Hawaii, you had the ship captain that was wandering around the island and looking for the chief. He needed to talk to the chief about something or other. And they said, oh, you can't talk to the chief. He's surfing. So he goes down to the water's edge and he's waiting. And they're out there surfing. He goes, oh, tell him to come in. And he goes, oh, no. Nobody tells the chief to come in when he's surfing. So he's waiting there. And then they all started coming to shore. And they're all naked. And he goes, oh, they're all naked. How am I going to tell which one's the chief? And he said, oh, the only one not carrying a surfboard will be the chief. And we get that. The Olas are so heavy. That everybody's carrying a board.
That's amazing.
So that's another thing about the heaviness of the board actually has a place, and it's a beautiful feeling on the conditions you want it to be in. So where my shaping ended, and it was very easy for me to step off the escalator at this time, was I was making the corky boards, and that had the polystyrene, which has that wonderful lightness in the water, fantastic, with wood on both sides, which gives you that wood feeling. But I was able to manage the flex because in the middle of the board, you'd have thick polystyrene and wood on top and wood on the bottom, and it was rigid. As you get towards the very tip of the tail, I would lift it and we get thinner. So just behind the fin, you would have less polystyrene between the wood and you'd have a flex. And it's a really solid, good flex. And then in the front of the board, for the nose riders, again, the board gets thinner, and so the polystyrene is an inch thick, and you've got wood on the top and the bottom, and then you get the flex in that. And the flex in those boards, I was absolutely enamored with.
I remember surfing with you at Tea Tree one day, and you had quite a long, I think it was probably over 10 feet.
Yeah.
One of those boards, the cork material, on the deck. Was it on the bottom too, the cork? It was
just on the rails.
On the rails.
Yeah. No, that one had the cork on the deck and the rails. Yeah.
Because I remember seeing you be like, I don't know, what looked like 30 meters, maybe 20, 30 meters behind in a section. So, ahead of you, the direction you wanted to go was like 20 to 30 meters of white water. And you were in the flats, and, if you were on a tiny shortboard, somebody would have gotten heaps of speed and then try to scoot around that whole section and get back to the blue wall of the wave. And I was watching you like, oh, that's his ride finished. And you did this shimmy, whatever you want to call it, this little spring in your legs where you bent your legs and pushed. And it was like you were loading up an arrow in a bow, and the board just went boing, and you just projected It was the only move you did. You didn't keep wiggling. There was no pumping at all. You just did that, and it just sprang, and you just scooted along just in front of the whitewater, like Mickey Dora would have been doing the bicycle thing. You weren't doing anything. You were gliding, and you got back to the wall. And it was this subtle thing that probably 90% of people wouldn't have even noticed. But I remember seeing it going, holy shit, that was some finesse to be able to do that. And what is that board that enabled you to do that? Because usually big boards like that are pretty sort of dull, they're big and heavy. When was that? That was that experience, exactly what you're talking about. That's the spring that you'd shaped into that.
Yeah.
Which is all subtle stuff, and it's fun for us to dork out on. And if other people get to try it and they feel that and they understand what's happening, that is a really amazing sensation in surfing.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it still catches on, because it's a very clever way of constructing a board where you're planning your flex, and you can completely organize or structure your flex patterns in a board surgically. Yeah. But from that, so I found that the perfect foam that I wanted, and DuPont made it, and sometime in the past a container of it made it to Australia, and I managed to buy pretty much all of it, and then they don't make it anymore. So I'd reached this pinnacle of something that I desperately needed to make these boards, and it wasn't here anymore. So then I had to go back to what George Greeno uses, which is the EPS foam, which is the super dense. Yep. He used that 64 kg dense, and I was using 32, which is really dense as well, where most of their surfboards are 18 or something. Anyway, and so that was sort of kind of a red light to me, like, oh my God, this project is going to have a problem here. And then the other thing that happened is I was using the urushi, and that's that tree sap from Japan. And the guys came down to me and they said, we want to reignite urushi in Japan the same way you did with polony with Australia. If you make surfboards out of it, it just kind of buoys the industry, just that little bit. It gives it a difference in usage and opens the doors that people will get excited about it. So the city of Kyoto backed this urushi manufacturer who makes it in the old-fashioned way, ancient techniques. And I shaped a couple of alayas, one proper alaya with a rounded bottom and 2 belly boards, and he put the urushi on them, and he came back down, and Gus O'Malley rode the alaya, and it was so fast. It was that urushi. I just went, oh my God, I was on the belly board. I went, this is a fast surface. Like, it's mentally fast. So a lot of guys had surfed that alaya, and they just said, there's something wrong with this. It is so fast. Even when you jump in, I was with a really good surfer in Japan, and we jumped in the water next to each other, and he paddled, and I said, how does it paddle? And he kind of goes, oh my God, this paddles so fast. It's mental. So we talked to George Greeno about surface and speed and water tension and how important that is. And George says, well, the wet and dry 400 is the fastest. And then there's all this, then we said oil. Well, no, oil's the fastest. And, a properly oiled wood board is super, super fast and the water tension doesn't slow down. So when you're going through a section, you don't slow down. The board just keeps going. See, the water tension is what stops you on the long boards. The urushi is one full step above that. And so I made some of my nose riders with it, and I was just absolutely blown away. But the problem is it's a poison oak, and so it gets into you. And the first time I smelled it didn't really bother me. The second time I was doing a board, and I got a little bit, just a drop on the tip of my finger, and I was sick for about 2 weeks. And I thought, okay, I'm super allergic to this. And this goes back to glassing a boat with epoxy way back when, and glassing all these years. So I'm totally sensitized to epoxy, now to polystyrene resin. And now with urushi, I'm very sensitized to it. So then Gus O'Malley and Joe Harding were my team riders and shapers. We made a couple of boards, and they put urushi on them. And I was back, in my chair watching, and I still got super sick.
Oh, wow.
So we went down and filmed them surfing. And I just said, well, that's the end of my journey, because I've run out of foam and I can't even get in the room with urushi. And this is the board that I want to make. And you get the flex on the nose, and you have the urushi, and you go so stupidly fast. And I just got to that point. And the finless boards as well. The finless boards, you come off the bottom, you just go so fast. There's no surface tension. but I can't do it anymore. And I can't even surf as well anymore. So that's when the politics thing came. And I just said, all right, I've reached the end here. I've kind of finished my own personal goal. I'm happy to tell everybody about it. I'm going to do politics. Happy to do that. But the top of my shed, I've got all the boards. I've got all the templates. I've got Bill Wallace's template to make toothpicks. I have the Ola templates. I got the ancient Alea templates. I've got Bob Cooper's fin template through the entire shortboard revolution. I've got his templates. I've got, I've got, I'll call it Takayama's. There's so much knowledge there that I can pass that on, plus all of the different ways to make surfboards. And what I wanted to do was go to these different places and say, just bring me out your polystyrene. Bring me what you got, and let's make surfboards out of it. And they might not be, a version of a Kelly Slater surfboard, but you don't need that. This is make what you can and surf. Let the ocean tell you what you need. Let the world tell you what you can do to enjoy the surf, so that everybody can surf. Because, you worry about that. You go to these places and you have your quiver and you're looking down the beach. Nobody else has got a quiver. Did that affect you?
Well, it's funnily, these days where we live, now seeing, someone with the pointy nose thruster is an anomaly, and it's like the selfish side of someone, like the selfish side in me, seeing that there's all these people who, for their skill level, they're riding, a fat mid-length or a longboard or something, and it's the perfect thing for them to ride because they can catch waves easily and they can ride those waves easily through flat spots and whatnot. And the selfish side of me is like, oh, damn, they're not going to be flailing around in the whitewater on a pointy nose thruster, not able to catch waves and ride them properly. Damn it, that's less waves for me.
Yeah.
But then really, that's just being silly and everything. But really, the feeling for me is like, I've known a lot of people over the years who love their surfing and perhaps don't have a lot of athleticism or don't have the opportunity to go surfing much. And they were really struggling on the sort of highly spruiked pointy nose thrusters that were way too small for their skill level and everything. And now I see them on a stretched fish or a mid-length or a longboard or whatever, and they're smiling and they're stoked and they're out in the water, and the atmosphere in general is better because people are happier. And that's really wonderful, and that's what it's about. And so to me, that's a really good, healthy sign these days of, cultural maturing to a degree. They were volatile lineups in the 90s and 2000s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. You speak to the honest, good old boys in the area and they're like, yeah, the good old days. I don't know about that. There was less people around, but the people were here, were fighting. There was always a scrap in the lineup. There's always beefs with each other and people being tough, macho ding-dongs and all that. And they're saying, look at the atmosphere now. There are more people in water, but that behavior isn't happening as much, and there's more women in the water and there's people of all ages. And I think that's really wonderful. I think that's a healthy sign. So, I think that's been certainly something that has been cool to watch over the last 20 years. I got strung up in the pine trees at Burleigh as a kid. My clothes ripped off me and tied to the tree with my leg rope because I was riding a weird little Dick Van Stralen surfboard. That's not going to happen these days. It doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. So I think those are positive signs.
That's such a positive thing, maybe to end on. Maybe this is the fifth and final ending, which is, that we look at the world and we get worried and so forth. But when you look at surfing culture, here in the beginning, I was saying, I'm worried about the culture not being passed on. But what you just said, which is, right in front of us, how many young girls are surfing and older people and the cohesiveness in the lineup, the whole vibe is so different and it is so much better than the 70s. Oh my God, the 80s.
So you would agree then, you have that same feeling?
100%. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, it actually is really good. And maybe this is a new culture. David, it's just so easy to put your head down in the mud and say, oh man, the culture's not being passed on, blah, blah, blah. But there you have it. It's bloomed in a new way. And the the girls surfing like you, Lauren, is just so much better than it was. Even coming to Noosa in 1998, there was a handful of women out there, and I don't think they were treated well. You had that rub off from the old times, and that's long gone, or I hope it's gone, or hope it's faded. What do you think?
Oh, it's gotten so much better. I think seeing, I don't know, representation is so powerful. When I was growing up, not very many women hung 10, or at least you didn't see many women hanging 10. I had a poster of Belinda on my wall of her hanging 10, probably at Tea Tree. And that was powerful to me. But there weren't many women, like you wouldn't rock up to any given beach and see women nose riding at a really technical level. And I think that's because it can be hard to project, to imagine yourself doing something that doesn't quite seem possible, and I know that that's been true for a lot of women of color now. We just chatted with Chelsea Woody, who has an organization called Textured Waves, and they're all about amplifying the representation of women of color in surfing. So just showing that there actually are Black and brown women all over the world who are surfing really well to a high technical standard. And just because they haven't been included in mainstream surf depictions doesn't mean they aren't there. But there's power in showing that, oh yeah, young brown girls, young brown boys, you can totally do this too. And there are other people surfing like you. It's just that we've had this very narrow scope of what a surfer looks like, about what surf culture is, about, the worldview from which surf culture has been written. And that's been mostly from white, male, Southern Californians. And so we have a culture that looks like that, even though it's not necessarily representative of the rich diversity and incredible vastness of what it actually looks like or means to be a surfer.
Who froths more than Sally Parkin?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's so good.
She rides a bellyboard. So it just, she brought back bellyboarding in the UK. Like, she is such a landmark person. Talking about changing surf culture, bringing back and giving respect to the bellyboarding culture, and that opening up. And I talked to a lot of guys that could surf garbage today, and they paddle out on the bellyboard or walk out on the bellyboard and just froth. They get the same feeling. And that's what I get. I ride my bellyboard, and I feel it's this. I get my Greeno vision almost every day. I'm pulling into a little shore break, and I'm just barreled.
Thanks for listening with us today. If you have a spare moment, please leave us a review or consider sharing an episode with a friend. Both help us to find the very best stories from our global community of water people. This episode was edited by Ben Alexander. The podcast soundtrack was composed by Shannon Sol Carroll, with additional tunes improvised by Dave and goofy-footed legends Neil Purchase Jr. and Christian Barker. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcasts.